Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
The announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely
Vale, pues
Bueno, pues
ya está.
bueno,
Y bueno, es
pues
ahí,
pues
el
y ya está, poco más.
y ya está.
Good evening and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. We have a very special episode tonight, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Anna, Tallulah and Karine, and we're going to be talking all about authentic learning with This Is School. Now, you may well have heard of This Is School before. I'd certainly had, and I knew a lot about authentic language learning, and I'm really excited to learn about how This Is School has been able to branch out and offer authentic learning experience, not just in modern languages from Spanish to Mandarin and almost everything between, but also in geography as well. So we're going to start tonight, I think, with Anna, because Anna, I'd like you to introduce yourself and just tell us what is This Is School, where has it come from, and where are you at the moment?
Thank you very much, Tom. Yes, I'm Anna Conies-Wainwright, and I'm the co-founder and head of product at This Is School. And thank you very much also, Tom, for playing that little video from our website at the top of the show. Hopefully that gives you all a sense of the sort of authentic content that we offer on This Is School. So yeah, I think it'd be a great opportunity just to give you a bit of a sense of who we are and where we've come from and sort of what we've got to contribute to this conversation about authenticity and authentic resources in the classroom. So I think you have a picture, Tom.
I do indeed.
That we could have a little look at. So this here is my co-founder, George, looking very cool on the front of one of our t-shirts. And really the story of This Is School started with George when he was teaching French and Spanish in a secondary school here in the UK. And he was tasked with taking a group of students on a trip to Paris. And when they got there one afternoon, he gave them a very simple challenge. He said, go and speak to a French person. And off they all went, and they dutifully completed their challenge. But when they came back, he heard the same piece of feedback almost unanimously from every student in the group. And that was, we spoke to them, we used our very best French, but we didn't understand their replies. And they said, they just don't sound like the CDs we use in our lessons. And it was there that the initial idea for This Is School was born. And if we go over to the next picture, Tom, if you don't mind, we can sort of see kind of how far we've come. So here we are some 12 years later, 12 years into the journey towards trying to help students build language skills, for life. We've interviewed hundreds of young native speakers all over the world, asking them the kinds of questions that students need to be able to understand and respond to for their studies and for their exams. Filming their responses, no scripts, no control over what they say at all, simply featuring them using their language the way they always do, their own language. And we then, alongside these videos, we carefully build, create, and write a series of supporting exercises to help students, to hone their skills and really kind of mine the language out of that authentic content. We've got plenty to offer besides videos. You get a sort of sense of it here. Everything from grammar to speaking and writing and games to boot, plus a big suite of time-saving tools for teachers, which alongside authenticity is the other of our big passions here at This Is School. And as you can probably see, and as Tom mentioned, actually, in this, those of you who can see the visual, we have just begun to branch out into other subject areas as well.
So I think
Yeah.
it's a really fantastic introduction. So when I look at the dictionary and I look for the word authentic, it means something which is real, truthful, accurate. So in terms of this is school, what does authenticity look like in the classroom, in the languages classroom, in the geography classroom?
Well, so it's a really, really interesting question. And obviously, I think that authenticity is multifaceted. And it's going to mean something different in every individual subject area, but also probably to individual teachers too. At the most sort of specific level for languages, we talk about unscripted language, right? So that's where we haven't attempted to control what our interviewees say in any way. We haven't asked them to use certain tenses or certain vocabulary, or to speak slowly, or to speak with a more standardized accent than they normally do. Nothing like that. And that's one part. That's one part of authenticity, but just one part, really. The other thing I think that's important is that in our videos, students are seeing peers, people of the same age as them, and that's part of that authenticity and that realness too. And it's a big part of how we help students to engage more in the classroom. But Corinne probably has a take on what authenticity looks like in her classroom too.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
My next step was to go to Corinne, and Corinne, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself and talk about sort of from a teacher's perspective, because you're head of modern foreign languages. When we're talking about these authentic resources, where do you look for them? How do you look for them? How do you ensure that the students in your classroom are getting an authentic experience?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Tallulah. Good evening. So my name is Corinne Faust, and I'm the head of modern foreign languages at Charter Academy in Portsmouth. And I've been teaching for a bit more than 20 years now. So what I like about authenticity is, and what I look in authenticity is from anything we can find in a video, for example, online, in a just a book like a novel, or even just in human resources. I mean, for example, myself being French native, I always make sure that I input my own culture in the classroom, in terms of the methodology, in terms of terminology I'm going to use. I'm going to use words that we would normally use when we go to France or French-speaking country. And this stems from the fact that when I arrived in England, so 24 years ago, I started speaking my best English, and all of a sudden I found looking at people, and they were thinking, I don't know, they were looking at me like I was some sort of alien, because my English was really posh, when instead of, for example, I said, "Pardon me," or "Sorry, could you repeat?" I just said, "I beg your pardon," which sounded really, really posh. So I thought I need to make sure that when I teach, I'm going to teach the real language, and the language that young people their age will actually speak on the street, at home, etc. So authenticity for me, it's everything. It's the songs we're going to look for without having to look in the textbooks, because the songs are very artificial. And personally, I tend to shy away from them. So I will look for real songs, real artists, and will look at how I can actually develop them, but also analyze them and use them properly.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I did AS level French. That's a bit of a throwback.
Yes.
And I remember my French teacher, absolutely a wonderful person. He'd been teaching for 40 years and he retired a few years ago. And he just said, look, go on the French websites and go and read the football reports in the authentic French. Go and read the news stories. Go and you sort of watch the French television programs, get a stream on that, anything you can, rather than just sort of sticking to, non-authentic examples, which are useful in their own right, but actually by the time you actually move on to AS and the upper echelons of GCSE, certainly, and obviously with the new GCSEs, but all language learners of all ages, that access to authentic resources is so important. I went on a exchange trip. I'd have been 16 years old to Montpellier in France, and I was stayed with a host family, and I went to some lessons in a French school, and I just remember sitting there at least half the time going, hang on a second, what is going on here? Just because I wasn't used to, the some of the language, the speed of some of the language as well, and some of the vocabulary and terminology that was being used. So yeah, it's really important, and this is why what Corinne does is so important, to expose children from a young age to authentic language resources is so important, because not only does it prepare them for future study, but it also prepares them for foreign trips, to be able to speak to native speakers as well. Now, Tallulah, we haven't come to you yet, so we'll come to you now. Very good evening. Could you introduce, for those who don't know you, who you are, and talk about what authenticity means to you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. So my name's Tallulah Holly, and I'm the founder of Language Unpacked. I've been working with this school. I wrote a blog for the channel and whatnot, and it's been really, really interesting looking at the importance of authenticity in it. I completely agree with the things that, colleagues have said. Anna, you were talking about role modelling, and a lot of what I've done in the past is mentoring kids and the importance of role modelling. I completely agree. I think one of the wonderful things about the This Is School videos is that it's people that they might actually want to talk to. It's people that, they're going to be talking about things they find interesting. They're going to be, talking, they're a similar age and whatnot. So I can see at that age, you're like, I actually want to speak with this person. I actually want to be their friend. And I think that's really important. I was also thinking about, where we are in culture at the moment, when there's so much in terms of fake news and AI generated content, actually the importance of something that is true, that is real. When we're talking about authenticity, I think is really important. We want to feel like there's a human at the other end of it. And so again, having those like real humans who, like we heard in the video, make pauses and go around in circles with their words, like I've done as I'm saying this, that is how we speak. And that is how we should expect to be speaking when we're speaking another language. And those filler words are so crucial. Corinne, you spoke about, coming to the UK. I remember going to France as well on my year abroad. And for the first time hearing everyone say en fait in everything. And I was like, what? Like, do people say this all the time? But I suppose it's an equivalent of us saying like, we're constantly, saying like with everything. And so I think it's the speech that you're using, the speed that you're speaking at, and everything else. And actually having something that feels like it's from a real human being, and not from a computer.
It's really interesting, Tallulah, actually, that you mentioned kind of having a realistic model for your own speech, because I think that's something that can be it'd be very daunting for when you're learning a language, to imagine that you have to reach this perfection that's actually totally false. And if we stop and we pause and we reflect a little bit on the way we speak our native language, we would realize instantly that we don't reach anything near sort of perfect fluency, if there even is such a thing. And I find that I really love watching that sort of dawn on language learners. I'm not aiming for to be able to reel off a perfect monologue without a moment to think. That's not what I'm trying to achieve. And I also just want to say that you were quite right, Tallulah, about the having sort of peers who are intriguing because they're real people and because they're of a similar age. And we do hear a lot from schools, that students will say, oh, can we watch the video of the boy in the blue hoodie? Because they come to associate, they learn a bit about the people and they like the things that they've got to say and the way they speak, or even the way that they dress, or where they happen to be being filmed. And I love those sort of aspects, because that's what really ramps up the engagement and the motivation.
Yeah, makes a massive. Go on, Tallulah.
I was just going to say, I think it's the engagement thing. It's really motivational seeing people that are your own age, that, they're just different because they were born in a different country and that they've, grown up speaking a different language. But for all intents and purposes, they're the same as you. They could be you. And so that role modeling in terms of, increasing the engagement for people when we have such a decline of languages. I'm all about engagement. I do loads of research into it. So, engagement, motivation, I think it is crucial. Go on, Tom.
And
Yes,
I
engagement,
think
motivation,
those
crucial. And Karine, in terms of your classrooms, then what role do authentic resources play in terms of that engagement and motivation?
um a a very very big play. You know, it has a massive space in our teaching. Also because I do have the feeling that I don't just teach a subject. I really teach a life skill, and it's a skill that I want them to have all the way through their life. First of all, because we don't know what they're going to do later on in life, and it could be that they're going to find themselves in another country, like I am at the moment. And you know, having that role model all the time with them and saying it's okay if you make mistakes, it's okay if you stumble on your words, because we all do. You know, whether whichever language you're going to speak, you're going to stumble upon any words. You know, it doesn't matter. And, you know, it's really a case of you can make errors. It's that ethos really of trying and trying. And it doesn't matter if you don't get it right completely. And I think the having videos and having role model as well, you know, like realistic role models, it's so much better. Like you said, you know, Tallulah, with the world of technology and AI, which at the moment I can't even fathom working with. Um, it's it's a breath of fresh air to still have real people and real resources to work with.
And talking of real people and real resources, let's just remind ourselves about how native speakers speak when they don't have a script to follow.
Vale. Vale, pues.
Bueno, pues,
Ya está.
bueno,
Y. Bueno, pues.
ahí,
Pues. Y ya está, poco más.
y ya está.
So if I can go back to Anna then, and if I can ask Anna then, when teachers are looking for authenticity in their resources, obviously you have a really strong position in terms of working with teachers looking for those authentic resources. What are the main obstacles that they're facing?
It's a really good question, Tom. I think, and I'll be really interested to hear from Karine as well on this, but I think that, of course, in a school setting in the UK, you can, you know, search for the sort of authenticity that you're looking for, but at the end of the day, you still need to deliver the curriculum, and students need to be able to cover the topics that are set out or the topics that they're going to be tested on in their exam. And so when it comes to looking for resources, you need to be able to find something that can give you the authenticity that you want for that engagement factor and for that life skill. Like Karine rightly said, we're teaching a skill that we hope will stay with students for the rest of their life, but also make sure you cover the required vocabulary, the required topics, and the required tenses. And so that's something, you know, that we've worked really hard on, and it's not always straightforward. If you don't control what people say in order to preserve the authenticity, then you know exactly how well you can hit those points on the curriculum is, you know, it's not necessarily straightforward, but we've worked hard to kind of to find the right balance to help teachers hit both those things, the authenticity that they're looking for to motivate their students, and also, you know, hitting the points on the curriculum. And the other thing is, of course, it's about being able to find the right resource. You know, teachers have so much on their plates, and you know, you need more than just one good video. You need to be able to turn to something at the last minute when a lesson's a few minutes shorter than you thought it was going to be, or when there's a cover lesson or something. And so, creating the exercises so that they're all there and ready to go, we hope, you know, helps teachers deal with some of those unpredictable aspects of their job.
It's definitely a huge factor thinking about the pressures that are on teachers at the moment. For those people who are watching this and are new to Teachers Talk Radio tonight, the vast majority of our hosts work in classrooms and schools all week round. I teach 21 hours a week. I've got Year 10 Parents' Evening tomorrow. I've had CPD after school twilight CPD today. You know, we're hard pressed, and the current climate at the moment in schools is very much of teacher shortages, teacher absences, long-term cover. We know that there's been a lack of engagement and motivation as a result of COVID, and this is, I suppose, where This Is School comes in. Now, Corinne, from the chalk face yourself as well, what obstacles do you have when you're looking for authentic resources?
So going back onto what Anna was saying, I mean, it's really important that when you find a video, you still need to find the way to exploit it. When you find a song, you need to find the way of exploiting that as well, or a text or anything. We've got to be able to exploit that. And this takes a lot of time. And the fact that we've got a website such as This Is School means that the video is there, but it's also exploited already. So we've got a minimum amount of work in order to have a ready resource. I've used quite a lot of the videos, and looking at all the resources available with this video, having to change maybe sometimes a minimal amount to make sure that I will be able to access everyone in my classroom, depending whether they are SCND, whether they are EAL, whether they are high prioritainer or low prioritainer. It's a hell of a, it's just so much work going on to one resource. So having this readily available, it's so important. So time is a very, very big restriction.
Yeah, time saving is so essential, but not just sort of, I've been there in the past. I know teachers who have been there in the past, sort of get back at home one evening, think, I've got a lesson tomorrow. I haven't got much planned. Let's go onto an unnamed website and download something from the internet for free, which chances are it could be good, but it might not be, and it probably won't be, let's face it. To be able to go somewhere which is trusted, which is truly authentic, which is, really, really strong, and that's what Corinne's talking about. It's a huge... It removes a huge burden from heads of department and from teachers as well. Tallulah, from your perspective then, main obstacles which are facing those looking for authenticity in their resources. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with what people have said before. I think what I'd add is the level. Corinne spoke about needing to differentiate in the class. But you also find that authentic materials are used more at high levels, so degree or A level. And they're often, you're taught to like read a book in French or German or whatever. But when you've got people who are initially learning, even primary school kids, we control the space a lot more, and we control the content, the vocabulary that's being used a lot more. So when looking at authentic materials, I think it's important that we, recognise that there can be a sort of restriction there around the level, or a perceived restriction. Because what I'd advocate for really is actually teaching kids to recognise that if you don't understand a word, that's okay. And actually building their resilience in that. So you can actually give them a resource that is maybe a little bit of a higher level, and getting them to see the vocabulary that they do know, the structures that they do know, and teaching them how to hear the bits that they do, hold on to those, and then be able to work with the rest of it. Because when they go to the country, I've been studying French for 13 years before I went to live there for a year. There were still those that I didn't know, but I'd learned to get used to it, and I'd learned to ask, and I'd learned to work out all the other bits of the sentence that I did know. So I think there's a sort of a perception, at least, or a worry around the level. And if we're using authentic materials, how can we do that with lower level learners? But actually, I think, within reason, we can. And it actually becomes a fantastic opportunity to talk to them about what do you do when you don't understand a word or a whole sentence, and how do we, operate in those sorts of circumstances. So yeah, for me, level and being able to pitch it right, and being able to differentiate between different learners is definitely something to think about.
I think that's
Definitely.
really Oh, sorry,
Go
Tom.
on, Anna. Go on, Anna.
I just thought it was so interesting what Lulu was saying about how we help students to kind of bridge the gap between resources where that they're comfortable with, that may be very tightly controlled, and then resources that are authentic, and then therefore kind of come with more of an unknown factor, an uncertainty factor. If we don't control what people say in our resources, they could say anything. Could be any piece of vocabulary. They could choose a really, really interesting and unusual adjective, just then drop that in. And I think that's really, really important. I mean, I learn words in English every day that I didn't know the meaning of. And I do think that it's really part of our responsibility as resource providers, to build in the structures that help students to bridge the gap between the level that they're at and the level that they'd like to aim for, whatever those are. And I think that's really important to sort of have a strong kind of pedagogical approach. We're not simply just a library for people to access. Like Karine said, there's no time. Teachers don't have time to create endless resources, and and that falls on us. And it's something that I think you can't rest on your laurels. You have to be constantly sort of reassessing the assistance that you're providing and the pedagogical approach that we're using in the resources to try to make sure that we can keep adding value and taking things off teachers' plates.
Definitely, that's all really, really important. And Karine, does that message chime with you? I suppose that's my question in
Yes.
terms of sort of feelings about we're as teachers having to constantly update, constantly refine, constantly refresh. Is it useful having resources that are doing that along the way with us?
Definitely, it's really, really useful. And also, what I wanted to mention is that these resources are safe. Because, for example, when we want to go and find a realistic resource online, we need to absolutely check the full content of it, because there could be a picture that is not really allowed. We need to think of the safeguarding of our students, our safeguarding as well. And there's a lot of factors to bear in mind when we find a resource. So the fact that we have your resources, and they're safe, and they're safe for the students to watch at home as well. And that's really important, not just in the classroom, but at home, even involved with loads of people around, it doesn't matter. They are still safe to do so. And that's really, really important for us as teachers.
Yes, it puts a lot of teachers' minds at ease and a lot of parents' minds at ease as well, especially when
Yes.
students are doing homework, home learning as well, ensuring that resources are safe. It's a prerequisite, and so very, very important. Looking then at sort of authentic resources and looking at the word that every senior leader likes to wheel out, which is impact. What impact? I'm going to put a little graphic up on the screen for those who are listening back on demand on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the website, ttradio.org/listen back. We've got a few quotes here about why authenticity matters, which I'm just going to read out. So the first one says, a student showed me a video of her at a ballet masterclass in Verona over the holidays. There were several French ballerinas in the class, and she felt that her French skills from this school were put to good effect. The second one says, we particularly like the fact it is constantly being updated with new and exciting features, and one of its great strengths is the clever way in which real language is exploited as a resource by the use of some very user-friendly and well-designed activities. And the third one says, for me, it's the authentic language that is presented in front of us of all people from around the world. And that's not exhaustive by any means. And we can only fit 3 in the screen. And if we were going to read more out, we'd be here until about 10 o'clock at night. It's currently 8 o'clock. So Anna, the third I word supposedly then, impact. What impact do these authentic resources have?
Well, I think I really, really love that first quote that you read out, Tom. The idea that, I think that a student being able to use what they've learned in school to do something that they love outside of school. Isn't that the dream? That's what keeps me getting out of bed in the morning anyway. I think that there's the linguistic impact, which and that's a good example. So being able to have a fruitful communication in another language is so satisfying. Anybody who's a linguist knows the the joy that is successfully communicating something in a language that you're learning. And then there's the sort of the cultural impact as well. Without wanting to sound sort of too cheesy, there's the sort of broadening horizons thing. Wherever you are in the world, there's always going to be a sort of geographical barrier to being able to be fully immersed in a language that you're learning, sort of by definition. And I think that providing so many voices for students to hear, and so many sort of settings for them to get a glimpse of, and cultures for them to hear about, we can help it to feel closer, to kind of to do that which teachers work so hard to do against all odds, to try to sort of bring the language and the culture kind of into the classroom. And we can sort of help with that by providing these little sort of snapshots into real life in other parts of the world.
Thank you for that. A whole range of impact, and it's those words again which senior leaders love to use: cultural capital, and building cultural capital amongst the students. Kareen's nodding her head for those who are listening back to the podcast. She's heard those words used many a time in her settings. So Kareen, as the head of Modern Foreign Languages here, what's the impact been for you in your classrooms, in your school?
I think, as you mentioned earlier on, the cultural capital is something that's really embedded in all our classroom nowadays. You cannot have a language lesson without having any cultural capital in there. It's just not possible. And the impact that it has on the students is absolutely amazing. First of all, it means that they're not just listening to the teacher, who, even though he could be a native speaker, is not real, because that even as a native speaker, because you are a teacher, you're not real. It's not the same. Having this video, obviously, it's absolutely amazing. The next thing I wanted to also add is the fact that it's inclusive in the sense that we're not going to see always the same people talking. We are talking about people from different countries, from different religions, from different backgrounds, from different wealth. And it is so important in the schools that we are working in nowadays, where all our students are coming from different paths of life. And they need to be able to identify themselves to the people they're listening to. And listening to just a teacher is not identification, because we have this sort of, we're perfect. We're seen as being perfect. We know everything. We come with our knowledge. Whereas when they listen to Samuel or anyone, from Mexico, from Paris, or from Brussels, or from Hong Kong, it's completely different. They are real people. They're not teachers, and they're not perfect. And I think that's really the important thing.
Yeah, that's the polished, measured, perfect things we might get on listening tests, which I certainly remember in the past. Having this recognition that actually native language speakers are fallible and will use filler words. Agree completely with that. And Tallulah, does what Kareen said chime with you in terms of looking at sort of the impact of authentic resources in the classroom? What's your take on that?
Yeah, again, completely agree. I think one of the interesting things is this idea of actually that if materials are inauthentic, then they've been mediated or translated in a way. And so they're being viewed by, in our case, like the Anglosphere, talking, about France or about another country. So I think one of the joys of learning a language is you can start reading their own materials, and you can start understanding that country and those peoples from within and not outside of, looking in. And suddenly when you're using authentic materials, you're allowing those people to speak for themselves. So that inclusivity point that Kareen talked about, I think particularly for cultures that are further from our own, that is very important, where there is a history of colonialism and racism, being able to allow people to speak for themselves I think is really crucial. And so, authentic materials stop that element of mediation or translation that can happen, and the power dynamics and everything else that goes with it. So, for me, that cultural aspect and, giving people a voice to speak for themselves and learning more about their culture, their language from within, I think is really crucial.
And, I'm a history teacher here. I'm not a language teacher, but it's exactly the same in history as well. When we are tackling these fairly thorny concepts and parts of our past, like enslavement, colonialism, things like that. We want to make sure that the sources we use, that the evidence that we draw upon in the classroom is authentic and comes directly from those who experience the things that we're talking about. And that is essential to any good history teaching. And it's really important as well in language learning, as we've just heard there. Anna, anything you want to add to what Talluda's just said?
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. And I really like your analogy of sort of being on the inside rather than looking from the outside. And actually something that came to mind when you mentioned allowing people to speak for themselves is one of the things that I really love when I come across it in our videos is when, a teenager just sort of doesn't really have much to say on a particular question. In the textbooks, and the question is, I don't know, what sports do you like? And everyone has a very wholesome answer about the sports that they do. Probably 2 sports, one's a team sport, probably one's an individual sport. But I mean, that's not, I personally don't have any sports I'm particularly fond of. And I love it if I come across someone saying, not really interested in that. I'd rather do this because it allows, it's about that. It's about recognizing yourself and just recognizing the far broader range of people and interests that are out there. And they're not all just about sort of shoehorning in the vocabulary for sports, but about learning to express oneself, whatever it is that one has to say.
And on that theme, I suppose, we're looking at sort of when we don't highlight and use authenticity in the classroom. We've covered this already, I suppose, but in some, really, I'm going to go to Corinne first on this one. If we're not highlighting authenticity, if we're not using authenticity, what are teachers missing out on? What are students missing out on?
I think the teacher's missing out on a lot of enjoyment. First of all, as a teacher, I really love teaching about culture, about authenticity. Otherwise, it doesn't make us real people. We might as well just put a robot in front of them and it will do exactly the same. I like the fact that the lessons are lively and yes, they're authentic. They're full of errors and they're full of words that we are looking for and words that we want. I don't want to make sure. I don't want to say this. I want to say it. I don't know. I can't remember this word. How do you say this? And I said, how can you use your own language in order to say it differently? And I always put my own experience of me going to England or Spain, not having the right amount of language I needed during a certain situation and having to find my own word in my head because I didn't have my textbooks with me and I didn't have a dictionary with me. And you have to find your way around. And that's really, really important. And they need to know that. And in terms of the students, if there's no authenticity, then you're not teaching a language, because a language is something that's alive. And, if there's no authenticity, it's no longer alive. You might as well just teach Latin, because it's not spoken anymore. It's just written. It's not a live language. And, as much as Latin is very important when teaching a language, it's not the language itself. And there's so much breadth in authenticity that we can look into. And students would miss a lot, really a lot.
I like that quote. If you're not teaching authentically, you're not teaching a language. I like that one. I'm sure that will go out on the socials tonight. Tallula, if I can come to you then. So Corinne's just talked about what students and what teachers are missing out on if we're not teaching using authentic resources. What do you have to add on that one?
Yeah, I love Kareen's point about things being lively and energetic. I think it brings that real buzz when you've got authentic materials. And so I think the opposite when you don't. Kareen made a point, and I completely agree. There's a sense of it being stale. There's a sense of it being tasks for tasks' sake, of it being, I'm just learning this thing because I'm in a classroom, but it has no relevance, to the rest of my life or to outside the classroom, which again was why that quote about the ballet and actually being able to use it is so important. So I think you use that relevancy piece. And again, when we've got people who aren't taking languages and, we're competing against so many other subjects to try and get kids to pick modern languages, then I think making sure that it's relevant to their lives. And that can be in terms of the content, but also the format. This school uses videos, which is so crucial. And Kareen, you've mentioned there's other things like text and social media, and you can use advertisements and whatnot. So it's the case of the content being authentic and real, but also the format in which people are doing it, so that they are actually, engaging with content in a way that they would. And, they might actually go and follow something and, listen to TikToks in another language and whatnot. So being able to have that relevancy piece, I think, is really important, and showing kids where to find those materials and like role modeling that for them and encouraging them in it. I think, again, you lose that if you're not sort of really engaging with authentic materials.
Yeah, I like the point you made about recruitment, but also the fact, with schools under significant pressures in terms of getting students on the EBAC, a number of students are basically being told you need to do GCSE French, you need to do GCSE Spanish. And we've got to make sure that all of those students who are told, look, you are a high priority learner, you're doing French or Spanish, that actually they are engaged, they are motivated, they do want to be in those classrooms. And that's where authentic resources can come in. Anna, anything you would like to add on this? What would schools be missing without authentic resources?
I agree wholly with what Kareen and Tallulah have said. I think that the on the topic of sort of like the format, I think that video is so important these days. So much is consumed in video form. Everything through our whole lives. Things for in our professional lives, right down to, like you said, Tallulah, TikToks just for fun, or, even, the news, not just the news as broadcast live on television, but, in shorter form as well. And I think that's really important. That's just, meeting people where they're at and how they like to consume their information and their learning. And I also think that in terms of when we're talking about uptake, I think that it's really important to try to show as many students as possible that their kind of ideas for their life and where they'd like to get to in the future can include language, or rather like shouldn't exclude language if they don't want it to. I remember I was doing my degree, and you know what it's like, family members would say to me like, oh, what are you going to do with a degree in French and Italian? And after a while I just used to say, well, I'd do anything I want, but I could also do it in France or Italy. And I think that the moment that sort of like penny dropped for me, it wasn't about narrowing choices, quite the opposite. It was about opening doors and multiplying opportunities, if you like. And I think that something that we talk about sometimes here is trying to encourage more boys to pursue languages at a higher level. You don't hear it talked about in the same way that you hear about the gender disparity in other subjects. It's really, 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 really important. I mean, it's a really, really important thing to look at. And so I always hope, that with that sort of the kind of almost sort of peer-to-peer learning that we're trying to enable on This Is School, with plenty of videos of all different peoples from all sorts of different backgrounds and locations, that we help people to sort of identify themselves a bit, and that's one area that might where we might see some benefit.
Kareen, go for it.
Yes, sorry, I wanted to add something on what Anna said that really resonated with me. And when you were talking about, boys not achieving as much as girls, for example, in languages, I think it's also the fact that when the more realistic you're going to bring the language in the classroom, the more the students are not going to anymore say, oh, speaking another language is not cool. No, speaking a language is cool. Because I mean, the amount of times I said, think about the amount of people, the amount of more people you're going to be able to meet up in life. Think about the amount of different jobs you're going to be able to go for, whether you're a boy or a girl. You know, imagine the amount of countries you're going to be able to go and not feeling let down by your language, by your communication skills. Because obviously, yes, we teach French, Spanish, for example, in my school, but we teach more than just this. We teach communication skills, and there's a whole breadth of skills that we teach through language learning. And it's so important for each and every one of them to take with them in life. So definitely, I do agree with this.
And
Thank you.
talking about new friends and meeting new people, let's hear once again from some people who, when the scripts aren't quite there, don't quite know what to say.
Vale.
Vale, pues... bueno, pues...
Ya está.
Bueno,
Y bueno, es pues
ahí...
pues
el...
y ya está, poco más.
y ya está.
If I can go back to Anna then. So looking at Visis School in particular, we've talked a lot about videos, we've talked a lot about things like that. For those who are listening back on the podcast, there are all sorts of things as well that Visis School can help with. We've got on here vocab nutty games, grammar, speaking, writing, points target, teacher resources, and of course assignments. So Anna, I don't know if you just wanted to run us through some of these and how Visis School can help teachers and students.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're trying to really make sure that we can help with, all four of the key skills. Obviously, our video content is incredibly important for listening practice, and we know that is something that students often struggle with, and that we can, where we sort of can try to help improve engagement and that feeling of success that students have when they start to be able to tackle the language. We also have speaking and writing tools which allow students to either record themselves or write an answer in response to a prompt. And then we provide a whole series of tools to help teachers to give feedback to students on their work in a way that we hope makes it sort of a slightly lighter task for teachers, and allows them to give feedback, leave a voice note to give feedback for students in order to correct pronunciation that students can revisit later, and to help with those sorts of like asynchronous and independent learning elements. We're also, though we've got vocab, all the vocab your students might need, regardless of the example that you're working towards or the curriculum that you're following or the schemes of work that you have. And we also have a really, really comprehensive grammar section with some kind of pretty wacky grammar explainer videos that are very popular. And we sort of worked really hard to inject them with as much sort of kind of our quirky personality as possible. On the grammar front, I'm a bit of a grammar geek, I suppose. But I've always wanted to try to produce something that will allow students to work on grammar at least a little bit independently. I think that probably in the past, there's been a sense that, the teacher must always teach all grammar at the front of the classroom. And that's, hard work. It's hard work. And also, I think students when it comes to revision and things like that, students need to be able to kind of back up their learning by themselves. And I think what we've tried to do with our grammar section is to produce something that will allow students to actually make some tangible, satisfying progress on grammar, even when they're by themselves. And yeah, so that's something that we continue to, we can continue to push ahead with. And we keep bringing our kind of slightly bonkers grammar videos, more and more of them every week.
Mm-hmm. Adriana has just tweeted us and said, how can I get a link to these resources? So we've got our little banner at the bottom for those listening live on Twitter, on YouTube, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. But for those who are listening back as a podcast and can't see our little ticker at the bottom, Anna, can you tell Adriana and anybody else listening tonight about how you can get onto Visit School and the options and the opportunities available to teachers like Adriana?
Yeah, absolutely. Adriana, thank you very much for your message. So if you go to thisisschool.com, you'll see a nice big button that will offer you a chance to trial the site for free. If you fill in your details, then one of our team will get in touch and find out when would be convenient for you, when you'd most like to give it a go, and then they can get it all set up for you with whichever languages you're interested in looking at.
Adriana says, thank you. Now, Karine, looking at some of the resources that Anna's talked about, in terms of what you've used in your school, what have you found especially useful in your experience?
So in class, I've been using quite a lot of videos. What I like about the videos is where, for example, in some of my classes, I'm going to take, for example, my year 11 Spanish, where I've got 3 different ability students. So I've got my foundation tier students, I've got my higher tier students, and I've also got my super higher students. And one of them is native, 2 of them are, another one is near native. And therefore, it's really, really important to be able to think that I'm going to be able to give them each a different video to work on, independently, and I can actually pitch the right video for the right student. The other resource that we've been using was the vocabulary, but especially the one where we've got the nutty games, where we can input our own vocabulary into the nutty games. So instead of going global, we're going to the customized one, and we can input our own list of vocabulary. And where, for example, you set up a whole class working on a certain part of it, and they work against each other, they compete against each other, and they really, really enjoy this. We've also, obviously, we've used the assignments part to create assignment for the students to complete at home. We've used the points target as well. So points target, we use it also with our year 11 for their revision, where we tell them you can go into the videos, giving them sort of some pointers as to which type of video they could get, they could use. They can go into the grammar section. Again, the great thing is that they become a lot more independent after doing an audit of which grammar part do you need the most, where are your weaknesses, so therefore you can actually pick up this grammar section in order to improve yourself. And last but not least, the nutty games themselves, the global one, they really love it. And what we've done towards that as well to increase engagement is we've made a league tables. So we've got a display in our corridor, and each of the classes actually displayed with the number of peanuts that they've actually gained every week. And they love seeing their class or their name in the corridor every week. It's brilliant.
Karine, that's so nice to hear. For a little bit.
Even though our school is not not free school, we can still play with peanuts.
I think that's so wonderful to hear, and I love to hear those where kind of where what goes on the site crosses into sort of like the physical world and into the classroom. I think that's such a nice thing. For a little bit of context, Tom, Nutty Tiles is our real-time multiplayer vocab game where students can compete against each other to win peanuts. Peanuts are our sort of currency, I suppose, on the site. And it's pretty incredible how addicted some students get. but the vocab learning potential is real, and it's really quite it's brilliant. I love it when I hear that, you know, a student used a word and the teacher thought, hang on a minute, I don't think I taught them that. And they picked it up, you know, fiercely competing with one of their classmates for those peanuts.
That element of competition and engagement breeds motivation, and it leads to learning. And the key thing here is, you know, as a teacher who's seen a lot of bells and whistles, this isn't bells and whistles. This is authentic learning, and this is adding value to the language learning, and that is what is so massively important. But this school is not just about language learning. Anna, are you able to tell us about geography?
Yeah, right. Well, so yeah, absolutely. So we have fairly recently launched our geography resource. You know, over the years, people have said to us, you know, like some of these exercises and these resources would work well in other subjects. And, you know, being linguists, myself and George, initially we thought, well, now, you know, we're all about vocab and grammar and videos and phatic filler language and things like that. But as the platform developed, as we kind of grew our interest and our passion for that sort of authenticity, that authentic side, and bringing the curriculum and the real world closer together, you know, bridging that gap, we realized that it was absolutely true. We could indeed like expand out into other subject areas. And what I'm realizing is that with the same is true. There is such great potential to bring the real world to meet the facts and the knowledge and the processes that students need to be able to cover for their exams, and to bring those two together. And for geography, that's been we found it, you know, really, really satisfying. And we've brought our sort of signature approach to geography too. So we've spoken to real people. I think that probably, you know, as we said earlier, authenticity is a multifaceted thing. And I think you could spend your whole life trying to kind of pin down what it means. And the fact is that it will mean something different in everybody's classroom. But for me, I suppose at a very specific level, it has to be about hearing from real people, hearing them unfiltered in some way. And we've brought that to the geography resources as well. And there's such great potential for for students to see geography, you know, in absolutely everything, everywhere, all day. And that's what we want to showcase.
It's absolutely fantastic to see these principles of authentic learning being applied, not just to languages, but to geography as well. Very exciting. Now, we're going to wrap things up in a few minutes. But before we finish, I'm going to go around. I'm just going to ask you, why authenticity? I'm going to give you about 30, 45 seconds each. Why authenticity? Why authentic resources? Sorry to drop this on you, but I'm going to start with Tallulah, and then I'm going to go to Corinne, and then we're going to end up with Anna. So Tallulah, why authenticity?
I'm going to semi-cheat, and I'm going to say something that Corinne said earlier and take my point from her, because I loved when she said it just makes it more fun and more lively. And I think that is the crucial thing. You know, my big thing is motivation, engagement in language learning and getting people to actually take it. And unless they're having fun in the subject, they're not going to do it. So, thank you, Corinne, for your earlier point, because you've inspired me. But yeah, it's why authenticity? Because it's fun.
Mm-hmm. Corinne, why authenticity?
Well, I'm not going to repeat what Tallulah said, considering it was my words from earlier on. Thank you, Tallulah. But thank you very much for picking up my words. I feel flattered. I would say authenticity because I'm teaching a life skill, and I'm not just teaching a subject. It's just so important. I live off my languages. I live off my communication skills. And I would like every single one of my students to be able to say the same, regardless of whichever language they're speaking. and whoever they're talking to.
Nice
Sorry.
and succinct. Thank you. And finally, Anna, why authenticity?
What a big question. I think because the world is an endlessly interesting and varied and fascinating place, and therefore it offers so much. There are so many authentic resources. There's so much authenticity to use, to enjoy, and to exploit. Why do something inauthentic? Why use something contrived when there's so much richness out there to be accessed?
Fantastic answers all around, and that it comes to the end now, and it's been an absolutely fantastic. Karine, are you going to say something?
I just wanted to add a little something.
Of course you can, of course.
Sorry. In a world, also in a stage where in life at the moment, our teenagers live with technology. Our teenagers live in their own little world. Being able to teach a language and the culture around it means that, yes, they can travel physically, but when they cannot, they can actually do it virtually. And I think authenticity really brings that. So thank you.
What a note to end on. We've had an hour, and it's been a fantastic hour, and I'd love to talk more, and I'm sure we may be able to at some point as well. So big thank you to Anna, to Karine, and to Tallulah for joining us this evening to talk about This Is School. If you want to check out the resources at This Is School, then do go to the website thisisschool.com and drop the team a message there, and they'll be absolutely delighted to hear from you. You can listen back to this show on the Teachers Talk Radio website, ttradio.org/listen back, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much every podcast provider out there, including on the Teachers Talk Radio Podbean website. So it's been absolutely fantastic to speak to our guests, and I'll see you very, very soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.